Well, some hope the Indian Hills Theater would make it to the auction block.
But the Omaha landmark will instead face the chopping block.
The Indian Hills Theater on West Dodge Road will never open again. Methodist Health Systems purchased the building at 86th and West Dodge, and until today, we didn't know what was in store. Methodist says it will cost too much to renovate the building. There's problems with its heating and cooling systems, as well as concerns about asbestos.
Asbestos, mechanical and electrical problems are everywhere. Investors, along with Methodist Health System, who now owns the property, were told $1.7 million is needed to take care of it.
It just didn't make a lot of sense long term to plow a bunch of money in to this particular site.
We assumed that it was good enough condition we could just put in a Cinerama screen, put in the projectors, and start showing movies.
More parking will replace the theater to make room for new office space in the area. These seats will no longer be filled for the matinee or the twilight hour. There is no more hope.
This old place is getting torn down.
We would like to propose to Methodist management that a meeting between them and the Indian Hills Preservation Society take place anywhere they choose. It's fine with our society.
Exactly.
Let Omaha see and hear the truth.
All right. Yes, exactly.
If Methodist has nothing to hide, then it has nothing to fear. We have a plan to allow for new and immediate parking for the hospital, which it says it so desperately needs. If Methodist doesn't respond to this invitation, their reputation will be blackened for years to come in the minds of every single Omaha resident.
Exactly.
We have the original jewel right here in our own backyard, and we don't have to do much to make it a working theater again. We want to show Methodist the people of Omaha are committed to saving the Indian Hills Theater.
Have the right to do anything with their property that they own.
What about civic duty? Not? It's one of 3 left in the country.
Why didn't you do your civic duty and pay for it and buy it the first time?
Save Indian Hills.
Well, I can understand they're not in the theater business, but for rice cakes, let somebody who's in the theater business run it. Don't turn it into a parking lot, please.
We're so short on time. What we're doing, guys, is we're just having a rally on Sunday in front of the theater. The press is going to be there, all 4 channels. We're going to try to get as many people there.
It was a nice theater.
Do you want the Indian Hills Theater saved or torn down?
Saved.
Why?
Because it's a good theater.
What makes it a good theater?
I don't know.
Yes. We're gonna have a rally on Sunday if you're interested.
Are you really?
Yeah, at the Indian Hills at 1 o'clock.
I love the Indian Hills. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think the Methodist hasn't really thought about the memories and everything else. And some of the most fantastic couples met at the Indian Hills Theater. Why take that away, especially if it's not necessary? Especially for a parking structure? There's other alternatives that they could come up with, I believe.
This is what it is. It is not Methodist. It is the executive committee of Methodist. It is a group of men in suits who I wear a suit during the week, but it's not the same thing. These are men who have no interest except for building the empire of Methodist. And what they're doing is, I don't think they realize that they are setting themselves up to be the evil empire of Omaha.
Well, I'm here to protest tearing down the Indian Hills Theater. It's the biggest Cinerama screen in the world, and one of only 4 left. And it's a real part of history, and I don't think Omaha should keep tearing down its history.
The building is in great shape. It just needs someone to get in there and operate it again as a theater. Demolition is totally unnecessary.
They thought it would just disappear, and it's out of our control. And I'm here to say it's not going to go down without a little fight.
So we have kind of 3 levels. Our first level is what you're seeing now. The second level is trying to, once again, re-enter negotiations with them. Our third level is the nuclear bomb. Have the city declare it as a historical site.
But do you think this can be achieved before they tear it down in August?
Well, yes it is, because Methodists kind of screwed themselves when they announced the asbestos. Now, if they want to tear it down, they have to laboriously remove all that asbestos before they tear it down.
And of course, if they removed it, they could keep the theater.
Isn't that an obvious point?
It's the largest screen in the world, and we want to save it. I'm sorry, I'm not as...
You're doing good.
No.
Why not? You really are. That's exactly what you want to say.
It's not really all that old of a building, and they haven't found somebody to buy it that wants to make it a theater, and if Methodist Hospital wants it in the parking lot, they have every right to make it a parking lot.
The whole damn world's going to be a parking lot before we know it.
I had a call from a message from a woman this morning who is a neighbor of my mother's, 3 blocks away. My mom lives in Indian Hills, directly to south of the house we built in '62. This lady's like 4 houses down. She's been there 35 years. And she left a message saying, "What are you doing?" She said, "Why are you trying to save that theater? The parking up here is terrible. Who's paying you to say this? Who's paying him to say that?" And I called her back, and I finally got a hold of her, and she was just an old bitch, man. And she was just going...
She was all her life.
She was just like, "Well, you know, the parking, when they announced they're going to demolish that theater, I cheered." She starts being the expert, and she says to me, she goes, "Well, that's broken up into 4 or 5 theaters down there." And I'm like going, I said, "Man, when's the last time you saw a film there?" She goes, "Don't get smart with me." When I heard that that theater was being torn down, it's the closest I've ever come to crying over a building. It was more than just an old movie theater, it was special.
We knew we had to make a public statement fast to show that there was a protest against this, that there was a contingency in Omaha that wanted to keep that theater and open it back up.
It was like a family member was under attack, and I owed it to myself. To be able to live with myself, I had to get up off my ass and do something.
One of the guys said, "You know what? I want you guys to understand, I've been through a fight like this before, and our chances of success are maybe 1%. And I remember thinking to myself, I'll take that.
In the early 1900s, the first movie theaters in this country weren't theaters at all, but machines that allowed the viewer to peer into an eyepiece and see a short movie, all for just a nickel. Eventually, these machines gave way to makeshift theaters and tents or empty storefronts. Sometime later, the rise of vaudeville and the evolution of feature-length silent movies like Birth of a Nation encouraged the building of large ornate theaters, modeled after the palaces and concert halls of Europe. These grand theaters featured both live entertainment and silent movies. However, due to the stock market crash of 1929, theater owners all across America were forced to cut costs, so they relied on showing movies and the new invention of sound movies in order to keep their seats filled. By the 1950s, the downtown areas of almost every American city were in economic trouble as people moved away from the inner city and built new homes in the outlying areas of town. Soon, newly designed shopping malls and movie theaters sprung up in these new suburbs, providing more comfort and convenience for families who no longer needed to go downtown at all. Meanwhile, most of the nation's movie palaces, all located in these abandoned downtown areas, eventually closed or were torn down to make way for new economic development. This process is what brought together a few concerned, dedicated individuals who understood the aesthetic and cultural importance of these structures. It was these individuals who became America's first theater preservationists.
In 1962, Ben Hall, who was a writer for Time Life magazine, wrote a book called The Best Remaining Seats. It was the first telling of the story of the movie Palace. He and our other founder, Brother Andrew Corsini, got together with about 85 people, and that was the nucleus of this organization. By that time, the preservation movement, the general preservation movement in this country, had been underway for a little while, and a lot of people started to appreciate the buildings just as many people were appreciating buildings across the country.
As more classic theaters were demolished in the 1960s and early 70s, a plan gradually developed to convert many of these theaters into symphonic concert halls because of their fine acoustics and architectural beauty. This especially included those of Rapp and Rapp's Orpheum Circuit, formerly known not only as beautiful film palaces, but also for their prominent role in vaudeville. Supported by city governments and private investors, the new plan worked, and by the end of the 20th century, over 28 Orpheum theaters had been preserved, along with hundreds of other classic movie palaces. Today, successful theater preservation takes many forms, including partnerships between concerned citizens, city governments, and even private corporations.
We work with clients all over the country to either restore their old theaters,
to consider restoring their old theaters, to consider an adaptive reuse of their theater space, and more specifically is to add value to a theater property. We know vast numbers of theaters are being razed and destroyed because community groups don't have the resources or the money or the intelligence or the ability to form a cadre of intelligent people with power that can save a theater.
Well, I think we're at perhaps the end times for theater preservation. I think most of the projects that are ever going to be done are done now, and I think the major ones are by and large over with. I mean, those in downtown areas in major cities, I think have happened. If they haven't happened, they are never going to happen in those places. The ones that you're going to see happen from now for the next 10, 15 years are going to be smaller theaters in smaller towns.
This is the day we've all been waiting for. An agreement signed between the Village of Lombard and the Foundation Board of the DuPage Theater.
The impact it's going to have on the Village of Lombard is just outstanding. I mean, we could go on and talk for hours of what benefit this will have to the Village of Lombard. I'm supportive of it. I will work with the foundation group as they move forward, and just looking for the day when we can have a official ribbon cutting and the grand opening of the theater.
It's an interesting history. It was bought by a company called Big Idea, which did the Christian animated talking vegetable videos. They were going to use it along with a new building as their headquarters and production facilities, and renovate the theater and use that as the mainstream house to premiere their product. Well, unfortunately, that didn't work. However, for $1, they sold it to the Village of Lombard. So the village has had it for a number of years, while various groups have organized and put forth various proposals for its reuse, renovation, and eventual saving.
This whole effort was started on the basis of being a community arts center, and not just movies, but movies, live performances, fine arts. It's as altruistic as it could ever be.
Those people they are unbelievable, the amount of passion and drive they had for this project. And so they just dragged me into it. I was just hooked.
We used to have it kind of wired for sound. We had a stereo system in there that was playing organ music, pipe organ music. I'd walk into that theater and I'd stand up at the top and I'd get chills. And you'd look at one side and you'd go, yeah, you know what, the plaster's missing over there, that artwork's gone, but it's on that side. So it's real easy to make a mold and duplicate it. It's just going in there and just hearing the music and just looking around going, this'll work, this is really something cool.
When I took my first tour of the theater, I was amazed. And I thought to myself, this is what is missing from our downtown. When the decision came back, I was shocked. I was shocked that these men who we've elected to represent us failed.
There was a ton of people that spoke in favor of it and 2 that spoke against. And it's like, well, if you look at those, you look at that ratio, why are they voting no?
There is an element that is so opposed to this theater, it's like they just want to take it down.
A representative from the Landmarks Preservation Council told me that, as far as she knows, this is the first time in the history of the Save Our Treasures grants that a town or city has refused a grant, and that's the Village of Lombard. To her knowledge, that's never happened before. I find that to be insulting.
They've threatened businesses in Lombard.
How'd they threaten them?
We talked to a couple of businesses around here, asking them, hey, would you like to put up, our sign to show support of the theater? And they've told us they can't afford to show support for it because of the negative people involved.
They had bulldozers on their website against the DuPage Theater, and they believe that we're a bunch of radicals.
I'll be blunt. They haven't done their job. They've completely divided the community. There are people that actually hate them. You see it on Cinema Treasures. You see it at the meetings where people yell at each other. They have been divisive. They have not been cohesive.
But wouldn't they argue back to you that, hey, we got those grants?
I'd say bullshit.
I think it's a classic textbook example of people on the one hand wanting to save it, and other people in the community who probably are saying they don't want to have it as a tax burden for the rest of its natural life.
Right now, we're in trouble. The theater is set for demolition, basically. There's been no date given, no date with destiny at this point, but the board has voted to demolish.
It's going to be bulldozed, and then who are they going to blame? They're going to all point fingers at each other. And you know what? They did it to themselves.
So after the first rally, they put a fence up around the theater. And that was, for me, probably the first sense of alarm when I realized that we had a vigorous opponent. It was almost like the theater was being held hostage by this conglomerate.
Janet Lee has already written a fax to the World Herald. She's imploring very strongly to save the theater. And by virtue of the fact that she's already written, it's become a national story now. And I'll pass this around now, and don't touch it because it's on fax paper, because I'm going to fax it to the media, to whom it may concern, which automatically makes it for public consumption. Please, 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 don't destroy a last representative of our cinematic history. Big screens are necessary to the Library of Congress film preservation programs. Along with other dedicated artists, I travel to all areas in our great nation to spread the word. The audiences are very receptive and understanding the need to protect our cultural legacy. Sincerely, Janet Lee.
Wow. Awesome.
Short and right to the point.
They were wonderful. In fact, we had the first three within 7 days of the announcement that the theater would come down.
Letters from Kirk Douglas and you know all these famous stars had not rolled in. Had it not been for that, I think our cause would have been much reduced.
We were showing that, well, you know, this isn't just an Omaha issue. We're talking about something that's the last of its kind in the world.
Yeah.
This is actually a world issue.
What was Methodist's response to the letters from Hollywood?
Methodist was quoted on a local news broadcast saying that we place no greater importance on the opinions of celebrities than we do on the average person on the street. And I read that to mean that not only do they not care what the people in Hollywood think, they really don't care what the people in Omaha think.
What else are they going to say? Well, yeah, they're right, we're wrong, but we're going to go ahead and do this anyway.
I'm Amy Cole, and I am an attorney and program officer at the Mountains Plains office of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. I came to Omaha today to hopefully to look at with the plan of looking at the Indian Hills Theater, and we're not able to get in to see the interior of the theater, but did get the opportunity to see the exterior and to learn about what the local group here is doing to try to save the building.
And why weren't you able to get inside?
Methodist Hospital said that they were unable to obtain authorization for me to see it.
I'm watching these workers, and I'm sure they're in there like defacing what I consider to be like, the Sistine Chapel or something. To them, it's like, what a dump. I mean, who would want this? And just, I'm sure they are. And it's like, what a weird juxtaposition, They're on the inside, and we're on the outside, and we can't get in.
This building was built in 1962, and I've actually read some comments that some folks in the paper said, well, they didn't see how anything that was younger than them could be historic. And in preservation, we are trying to raise the level of awareness and consciousness about things from the recent past and their significance, and encourage people to see those things as historic as well as things that are traditionally considered historic buildings. Although it looks like from the amount of activity going on here, the demo crews are already hard at work, so that's a bit challenging.
I used to go into theaters to see the theaters instead of the movies. The Gaiety was one of the theaters that I remember seeing because it was notable for having 20 gilded boxes and busts of Gaiety girls in the second balcony. It was just a very dramatic place. And it was also a place where you could see a double feature for $1. After it closed, it receded into the background until a couple of years ago, I guess in September of 2002, Dr. Little called and said, "Lee, I hear that the Gaiety Theater is going to be the subject of a discussion at the Boston Landmarks Commission where they're going to consider whether to invoke a demolition delay." There's a developer who wants to build 30 stories of luxury apartments on the site. Generally, any building older than 25 years has to come before the Landmarks Commission and be evaluated as to whether it can be demolished immediately or whether it has to be studied. We then got to work and put together a 125-page book on the history of the theater, during which time we discovered that there was a lot more of historic importance than anyone had realized existed.
I'm very interested in history, and I see this theater as a historical monument. The Gaiety was built in 1904, and it was originally a vaudeville house. And then around 1910 or so, when the neighborhood started to change and more African Americans came into the neighborhood, it became the resident theater for that community. And for a period of time, during the era of the Harlem Renaissance, it was a node on a network of theaters that connected several cities. It was largely variety, the performance of variety, and it pretty much ended with the onset of the Depression, which is what happened to so many of those theaters, because after the Depression, they were not able to afford the cost of live performers, so they went to film. And then I believe that the house closes in the 80s. It's unfortunate, but it's rather easy to understand how there's no real memory of this having been an important cultural location for the African American community.
They did vote to declare in their decision that although the Gaiety was significant on a local level, it didn't meet the national or regional significance required to be a landmark.
The main reason is because the mayor wouldn't want it to be landmarked. It just makes it more difficult to tear down. So he would have vetoed it in any case. As Ellen Lipsey, the executive director of the Landmarks Commission, said, "It's just in the wrong place, this theater." Well, it's the theater district.
Most of the people who enjoyed the theater are no longer alive. The generations here now probably have no memory of that. We tend to forget.
They have decided that it's not a theater. Now, could you believe something like that? The Gaiety Theater is not a theater, and therefore it can be destroyed.
The lawyer for the developer, over and over again, he said, "You see, it's not a theater." And I wondered what he was talking about, why he would say, "This isn't a theater." So I said, "Matt, what do you think it is?" He said, "Well, I don't know what it is, but it's not a theater." And it was obvious that he had some agenda in saying that.
This is a very huge and gorgeous historic theater, but it's inside and it's not on the street. And that's a lot of why they could get away with this, because the historic preservation people aren't that concerned with interiors, and the public didn't see the marquee, so they couldn't see anything that they were losing. The mayor could pretend there was nothing there because there's no marquee, so there's no theater.
And if the theater can stand for another few weeks, I have the sense that we could rally some more support, but this is the most optimism I would allow myself.
Certainly I'm hoping that we are embarking on an era when culture is going to become more and more important, but whether that's really going to be a reality, I can't say.
This theater means so much to the people of St. Joseph.
There have been so many people that have been through the doors of this building.
It was a part of our childhood. This was an important part of who we are. You know, from the 1920s, families grew up coming to this theater.
It's very important because of the plasterer that did the work, Waylon Gregory. He was very young at the age he did this building of 19, so it was quite a feat for him, and he also felt that this was the star of his career. He did a lot of buildings throughout the Kansas City area and Kansas and pretty much all over the United States. And he felt that this was very important because he actually did the whole building, whereas most of the time he did a facade or he did a ceiling inside a building or so on. So this one was, he did everything, the facade as well as the interior.
As a small child, I remember coming to the theater and there would be a movie playing on the screen, but I was usually more interested in the clouds above the canopy and watching them turn.
The canopy itself is cement and plaster, overlaid plaster, and we think that it was actually, when it was put up, the whole thing was put up. A lot of people think it was put up in sections, and it really wasn't. We think it was put up totally. They put the wire up, the wire mesh, and the rods and so on, and then they started plastering it. Around the outside, it has about 4 feet overhang, and then it's attached to the ceiling itself, the dome ceiling. In 1927, it had moving clouds that projected on the ceiling through projection machines, and they would move during the shows.
This was during a time when so many of our buildings in downtown St. Joseph were being torn down to make way for, you know, the new malls and parking. But there were a group of citizens that said this cannot happen to the Missouri Theater.
It was very important to the community because it was the last theater in St. Joe, actually, and so they were all gone but this one. I mean, it's just important to people because they came here as young people. You know, they come here as children, and you talk to people, and they worked here as ushers, and they worked here as ticket takers and as ticket sellers, and it was a part of their childhood, and they wanted to keep that.
This is the venue for our performing arts, and if we didn't have this theater, we wouldn't have that impressive of a location for our artists to perform.
The theater is home to a lot of different arts organizations. Ruby Resident Theater is a community theater here in St. Joseph. They use this theater exclusively. We have high schools come down and do their plays here. Dance recitals are often held here. So it's used for a lot of different things.
I think it's very important to save these buildings. These are the only relics of what life was in these communities. If you take these places away, you know, and you don't save them or you don't save this type of thing, then you lose your connection.
This connection that many people had with their local movie theaters changed when television became popular in the early 1950s. This new invention that brought entertainment directly into people's living rooms resulted in a significant drop in movie attendance. So in order to get people back into movie theaters, Hollywood developed widescreen formats like CinemaScope and VistaVision. But leading the wave of widescreen technology was Cinerama, a flawed but innovative process that used a special camera to record images with 3 lenses. When shown in a movie theater, 3 projectors were needed to display the image on a large curved screen. A few theater chains like Cooper spent millions of dollars in order to build new theaters that were specifically designed to show these Cinerama movies. These new theaters, like the Indian Hills, were the movie palaces of the automotive age.
You sit in a seat, and almost any seat is as good as another. The screen curves beyond your peripheral vision. You are immersed.
You know, you could see the whole war scene. You felt like it was there. You understood what the director was trying to portray to you.
The experience there is like nothing else you get. There's no other theater I've ever been to that's like that. I remember every movie I've seen there.
It was actually an optical 3D image because the curvature of the back of the screen matched the back of your eye.
The idea of the circular or round shape came pretty much right away. I felt it was a theater in the round because it's the curve of the screen, and also if you could bring the curve inside of the audience, then you could bring them more in visually. So I work always a lot with people's, how they how they react to space and light and everything biophysically, as well as psychoneurally. That's something my nerve response is.
When I think of Richard Kroller, the word that comes to mind for me is creativity. Creativity and innovation. This man, in my opinion, is pure genius in the way he approaches problems and in the way he sees the world.
The gold, I guess you call them baffles on the sides, did those serve any acoustic purpose as well?
Yes. Mm-hmm. The hard part of the surface would reflect the sound over to people. The round circles would go through to the wall, the sound.
Mm-hmm.
Sound, wherever it hits something, bounces at the same angle that it hits. So if it's a hard surface, that is. If it's a soft surface, it's absorbed into it. And so the question was how to get a balance in there when people had a few people coming in, for acoustics, versus, say, a big full theater. Because when people came in, particularly in the winter with maybe heavier coats or something, see, they're acting like acoustical beings there, their clothing and everything else. They said they never found a theater where the acoustics were so perfect,
Mm-hmm.
By wherever you're sitting, you'd get about the same amount of intensity of sound.
The Cooper chain built 3 theaters using Crowther's circular design. The Cooper in Denver was built first, Minneapolis second, and the Indian Hills third. Since it was last, the Indian Hills was the total refinement and finest example of Crowther's concept and circular design.
He thinks of himself as a holistic architect, one who thinks about the air you breathe and the sound you hear and what you see visually and how you are in context with the people sitting around you. All of those things are major for Richard Kroller.
Yeah, I did something that hadn't been done before. I used an air sawn ceiling, so that actually it was a perforated ceiling, acoustical ceiling. It was compartmented off in different ways to cover the auditorium, and so that there were return airs under the seats, which was not customary. So that way it was just like a gentle light breeze coming down from the seating with the air conditioning, so that people would not be disturbed. And so I used the air sound concept, which I never heard of anybody using it then or since.
I didn't get involved in this thing because it was a historically important theater, because it was architecturally unique. I got involved because I loved the place. When I was a kid, we lived in a subdivision called Indian Hills. Growing up, we would only have to walk maybe 4 or 5 blocks on a Saturday morning to the theater and catch a film.
My older brother Ron and my older brother Steve, they're both like I did. We grew up in the shadow of this theater. And it's like you live a couple blocks from the greatest movie theater on earth. You don't realize that. You think this must be the standard, that the best theaters on the earth are these huge screens wrap around that are just like a 3D experience that cannot be duplicated anywhere.
It was really a special place for us. And I had a record in the 60s. From 1962 till 1971, I saw every film that showed there, and I was so proud of my record. And in 71, when I was 14, there was a film called Friends. It was R-rated, and I was so upset because I couldn't get in.
I remember being about 5 or 6 years old, being taken to the Indian Hills, seeing Dr. Zhivago there, the movie about Russia. 20 years later, I lived in Russia, and I believe that the seed was laid when I saw Dr. Zhivago at the Indian Hills.
In my adult life, I would bring a date there, and it would be, I would talk about, this is a special place to me. This is kind of like a very almost holy place, if you can say that. It was my temple in a lot of ways, temple of film, I guess.
What happened to the Cooper Theater here in Denver?
Well, they tore it down. And that was really too bad.
The Cooper in Denver was torn down to make way for a bookstore, and the Cooper in Minneapolis was torn down to make way for a shopping mall. As a result, by the summer of 2001, the Indian Hills was the last surviving example of Crowther's circular design theater.
We got a call from a gentleman with a national advertising agency called Meridian. And out of the blue, he called. And he was a He was a writer and a representative of the agency, and he said, hey, my mom is in a nursing home in Omaha, and I come to Omaha periodically, and I've been reading about your story, and I think it's a great story, and our agency wants to produce, at no charge, public service announcements for your group. Wow. Who do you want?
Hi, I'm Leonard Maltin, and this is what you'd see if you were watching Cinerama at Indian Hills, only bigger. Haven't been to this unique theater? Sadly, you may never get the chance, because Indian Hills, the last surviving theater of its kind in the world, is slated to be torn down for a parking lot. But you can stop the demolition and help preserve Omaha's national historic treasure. Get involved. Call or email today and turn this into a happy ending.
We were formed 10 days ago because 10 days ago we discovered that this treasure was in danger. Our intention is to save this theater, first of all. We need to rescue this theater. Our next intention is to open it up as a first-run movie theater. I give you to Ron Hunter.
We are forming a Nebraska nonprofit corporation under the name Indian Hills Theater Preservation Society, Inc. The nonprofit corporation will explore all options for saving the theater for the citizens of Omaha, including, but not limited to, a cooperative use agreement with Methodist, a lease, or an outright purchase. We request that Methodist refrain from demolition or removal of the contents of the theater, which include the seats, the screen, the curtains, the projection, and the sound equipment. We request that the Methodist officials meet with us to discuss a plan to save the theater, which will be viable and mutually beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you.
Save the Indian Hills! Save the Indian Hills! Save the Indian Hills!
Save the Indian Hills! Save the Indian Hills! Save the Indian Hills! Save the Indian Hills! Save the Indian Hills! Save the Indian Hills! Save the Indian Hills!
We're gonna save it, folks. The city of Omaha wants us to. We're gonna save the Indian Hills. From here, the real work begins.
The building is architecturally more important than what a city or a community can decide to do with it. We don't have the right to take it away from the world. It's something special that exists. Yeah. Oh yes, and I totally agree with that. And I am a capitalist. I live in this country, but I'm here today to say that I don't support their decision.
What do you think about Methodist plans to turn it into a parking lot?
I think we got enough parking lots in the city.
You know, institutions are always going to need parking, but they're competing against things that could be used for tourism, things that have cultural value, historic value, and I don't think they need it bad enough to take this whole theater.
They own land that's a block away, and I mean, I think that should suffice.
We're just trying to indicate to these guys we want to work with them, but we also want them to recognize that this building, you can't be tearing it down. So where we're at right now is, first we have to preserve the building, second we have to get the money. So we have a problem because we don't have a commitment that they're not going to tear it down. So we're right between the first and the second points. But we can't stop. We have to keep going straight through. We have to go with the assumption that they're going to actually agree to this.
By the 1960s, the single-screen theater had reached a whole new level in architectural design. However, in a move to fill more seats and double their income, theater owners ignored this fact and began twinning their theaters. Soon, the concept went from the twinning of existing theaters to building new theaters with separate screen auditoriums that shared the same box office and concessions. Twin screens evolved into 4 screens, then 8, until finally, by the late 1990s, multiplexes evolved into megaplexes, giant buildings with 24 or more screen auditoriums. Showing fewer movies but with additional showtimes, megaplexes made it simpler for moviegoers to plan out their evening's entertainment. Taking advantage of this increase in attendance, the nation's theater chains earned even more profit by showing ads before each movie. At the same time, older single-screen theaters like the Indian Hills tried to remain competitive by adding a few additional screens around their main auditorium. but without much success. By 2005, high ticket prices and the glut of on-screen ads resulted in a significant drop in movie attendance. In addition, the interruptions caused by talkative audiences and cell phone users, along with the shorter window between theatrical and DVD release, convinced even more people to just stay home.
I think it's a growing trend. I think that the name is more out there, those words, home theater, and so you can go buy an inexpensive surround sound system, and people consider that to be home theater. You just hook that up to your 27-inch TV, and you have home theater. We don't agree with that. We think you need, as you have in a film theater, you need a large screen that takes up a large segment of your angle of vision, and you need a good sound system. Not just surround sound, but a very good sound system. You can do it at a level that's better than you will see in any theater. The quality of video is at the point now where we can equal, at home, digital cinema in a theater. We can do the same level of quality. It's expensive, but we can do the same level of quality that Lucasfilms demands in digital movie theaters.
How would you characterize your average customer? Are they younger, older, family-oriented, single?
I think that they're often are family-oriented. They're usually well-established people, 30 years old or above, that would like to come home after a busy day and stay there. Going to the theater, except for younger people, is not considered a desirable outing as it once was.
Today, the nation's theater chains continue to battle the rising number of empty seats. And even though attendance at movie theaters continues to spiral downward across the country, almost all of the major theater chains continue to build new megaplexes, driving more of the few remaining single-screen theaters out of business, such as this theater in Salt Lake City, Utah.
It's been a building that's been an icon around here for a long time.
It was one of the first big screens, and so it was really thrilling to come here and see the epic movies.
And I remember quite fondly, we'd specifically come to this theater at least once or twice a week.
I think the theaters that were built this way represent a way that we were in this country that no longer exists. It was a period when people gathered for entertainment in a very different way than we gather today. The costs were minimal to attend, and the environment in which we attended was beautiful. We felt good when we entered the theater. It wasn't a commercial feel, it was going out. You went on a date to one of these theaters, and you were going on a date.
Several of us came here and picketed. You know, and we had our big signs, honk if you want to save the villa.
There were kids, there were older people that came by, and we had banners and plaques and honking, and we had people stop. They brought photographs of their memories of the Villa Theater.
It just showed how much interest there was in actually saving it because people had such fond memories of the place.
I came for the last showing of the Two Towers and stayed through to when they turned off the lights. It was sad seeing the theater close, not knowing what was going to happen after that.
It just became an empty building. And then it was put up for sale, and there were really no one interested in buying it to return it to a theater or to preserve it as the building. I think that it was more to be a space for a big box store.
When we heard this is happening, we came into the picture. Once the community heard about this news that we are buying it, I had to do some explanation. I am buying this to preserve the landmark. I cannot run a theater. The people who were involved with it couldn't keep it open because financially it was not feasible. So I had to make sure that public understands that I will not be able to show movies in this theater anymore. And I felt they were featuring one form of art for many decades, and I'm going to preserve the building and hopefully feature another form of art. I come from a family that, we are very traditional families. Heritage plays a big role in our lives. My father, from where he's making his rugs, from his hometown, there are some of these patterns that goes well over 1,000 years back. When I heard that Villa Theater and it being a part of heritage, a part of the history of this community, how can it just one day close and they say the next thing is demolition? For me, it was very hard to digest that.
Dr. Hamid and I have some mutual friends, and I've actually bought a number of rugs from him over the years. A lot of it was a collaboration with Dr. Hamid as we would sit down and kind of look at his needs for his store and for his facilities.
I was approached by Dr. Hamid several months back, and I was born and raised around here, watched several movies in here, so I was very interested in working on this building. The actual work started about 4 months ago. We started demolition in small areas. We took out as little as we absolutely had to. We're trying to preserve as much as we can.
The front will pretty much stay as a theater. So that's one of our projects that is going to happen. The sign itself has been here right from the beginning. People remember the building because of this magnificent sign, but you can see it needs a huge amount of work. And so from the neons that are missing to the center part of it, the electrical work on it has to completely be redone. The range has been in the $30,000 to $70,000 range to just do the sign. Well, let's go in and let me show you what we're gonna do there. When we took over this place, we took over a broken up box. Everything that was sellable, it had been sold. The floors, of course, they were in tiers. For us to make it reusable, but at the same time preserve the integrity of the theater, we wanted to create bigger tiers, but at the same time, we had to make sure all of them are in curves. Now, if I was going to fill in everything and attach this area to the stage, it would have been 1/3 expensive than what it is now. However, we wanted to make sure that the feel of it stays as a theater. So we have created this basically subspaces that are going to be used for displays. If someday they plan to make this a theater, they can open up these floors and they're back to the very original.
The structure that is worthy of preservation doesn't have to be preserved to repeat the original function if you retain the message of the original structure within your new function. And so Dr. Adib's idea to restore it and bring it back to life, to revive it in a new incarnation, is the most wonderful thing you can do for retaining the past. Retain the past and pull it into the present.
The economics just don't work, I'm sorry. You know, it would be wonderful to save every theater that was ever built. But we've seen the free market economy at work. It hasn't happened. It is not going to happen. So if we can get half a loaf of the bread, then let's settle for half a loaf of the bread.
Not a single person so far has approached us that hasn't been supportive. When they come in to say, to express their feeling, I felt very even embarrassed, and that I wish I could do more than what I'm doing.
You know, when this is done and this is reopened, what is your hope as the architect? What do you hope people get out of it?
I hope they can walk in here and realize that they don't have to demolition a building to make it work for their current needs.
They may not agree with what's going on and how it's been preserved, but I think in the long run, at least this building that meant so much to so many people will still be standing and it'll be useful.
I think it's important to keep buildings like this around because it is a part of history, and you know, maybe someday this can return to be a theater. If not, at least it's here and we can come and remember what it was like.
It's not the monetary value, it is something beyond that, and that is preserving a piece of history, preserving heritage, preserving fantastic, beautiful memories that hundreds of thousands of people shared in that theater. Those are things that are value-wise way up there. To be able to be in that position, to do such a work, makes me feel good and makes me proud.
The Villa in Salt Lake City is not the first theater to be adapted for a different use. Just down the street, this former theater is now a Chinese restaurant. In Overland Park, Kansas, this theater is now a health club. And in Kearney, Nebraska, you can no longer see a movie at this theater, but you can get your teeth cleaned. But perhaps the greatest tragedy to befall any classic movie palace is what happened to this theater in Detroit, Michigan, which is now a parking garage.
There's closure. It's the completion of the circle, because one of the earliest things that happened on that very site was Henry Ford's shop where he was developing automobiles. So to have it go from Henry Ford developing the Model T to becoming a parking garage after having been a wonderful first-rate movie palace, I think that's the completion of the circle. And I certainly am no one to be standing here saying that this shouldn't be what's happening.
Okay, the building was built in 1926 by the architectural firm of Rapp & Rapp. It was built for movies. It contained a Wurlitzer organ. It opened with the silent film You Never Know Women. It, throughout the years, showed movies in the 70s. It was used as rock concerts under the name the Michigan Palace. It's just amazing how they left all the plaster still in place.
To have that turn around and become a parking garage by making a driveway through the lobby and then creating concrete ramps in the auditorium to park the cars, and then at the top, where the topmost ramp is, you're almost up to the ceiling, and to have a lot of the original plaster intact, watch where you park your car because some of it falls down, and to have the proscenium arch right over the edge, and you can look into the stage area, and the drape hangings, the lambrequins and whatnot, and grand drape, some of those were still hanging there, blowing in the wind and having the pigeons sit on them. Talk about archaeology, you don't have to go to Egypt.
Welcome to the upper balcony. There was two movies that I know of that were filmed here. The movie 8 Mile, featuring rapper Eminem, was filmed in this spot right here, where they did a rap before they went to the Chin-Tiki restaurant, which is also is down the street that exists. And they filmed recently The Island this year in 2005. Ewan McGregor ran up through the lobby, up into here, and then into a door where the police chase scene continued.
Oh my God, because of...
Okay, I'm standing in the glass atrium of the former Michigan Theater here, overlooking Bagley Avenue. This really hasn't ever been touched since the 70s, really. As you can see, it goes multi-stories. I'd say it goes about 3 stories tall. Originally in the 20s, sunset, as you could say, and it would reflect back at night. But you can see the former horse chariot that now sits in here, one of the horses. And it was this huge statue that was in the foyer space that was smashed when they had the rock concerts here. The staff just didn't really appreciate the value and smash whatever they could.
Sarah McLaughlin with Delirium on Omaha's Rock Alternative 106.9 The City. Nikki and Scott, 718.
Good morning, partly cloudy and 71.
We have Steve Dawes from the Indian Hills Preservation Society with us this morning. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you.
You were telling us that there is some possibilities of people that may take over the Indian Hills if it happens.
Yes, we have been contacted by a company that wants to make the Indian Hills one of the premier digital theaters in the country, which is huge.
What does that mean to a layman?
They have the capability to show motion or film, however you want to call it, on a digital screen. It works similar to DVD technology to a TV, except they would actually be able to download from secure New York office, put anything on the screen. Which I want to quickly mention, if Case Methodist is listening, they could watch an operation from around the world on the largest digital screen.
Oh,
there you go,
Methodist. You better believe they're listening.
Are you kidding me? Well, and I like the fact that news, I wanted to get that out there because I think a lot of people are still doing the naysayer thing of saying that, you know, this is a dead art form, Cinerama's no more. But if we get digital technology, that obviously makes that point irrelevant.
And they also want to restore the theater. So when people are saying, well, it's got problems, it was run down, it had bad management, whatever, they want to rebuild that theater from the ground up with top-of-the-line technology.
Excellent.
Demolition began a few days later with the destruction of the two newer theaters that were added onto the right of the main auditorium. This was ironic, because as these theaters came down, it was now possible to see Crowther's original circular design for the first time in years. This only added to the awareness of its historical and cultural significance as a unique example of a mid-century movie palace.
When you see the trees and the landscaping here, you can really tell the beauty of the theater and this area is still intact at this point. It makes me remember a period, bygone years. I think back to what it was. I think back to that period. I sometimes wonder if maybe that period is gone and what we remember the hills to be is actually what it was.
Let's bring the meeting to order.
I don't have caller ID and I can't use *79, so I can't tell where the call came from. But the person on the phone identified themselves as being close to the situation and the board at Methodist. At that point, they had my total attention. I was not a passive listener.
Didn't give out a name.
Did not give out a name.
It was a distinguished voice?
A very distinguished voice. I would say 50 to 60 years of age. Okay. Well educated, very fluent, got to the point and got off the phone.
Good.
An important man, it sounded like.
Yes. Yes, and there's only a couple of ways people could connect my name with the group and my actual phone number, because my phone is not listed as Stephen Dawes. It's under a city park.
And how they get your name?
It had to have either come from somebody on the board from when I called Stephen Long 2 months ago and they kept a record of it.
Yes.
Or somebody that has access to my medical records at Methodist because they're up to date with my current home phone
Most
number.
likely Stephen Long has your number.
So I was considering this a very valid call. They implied that Methodist's board is in an uproar. They are looking for a way to get out of this very graciously.
Yes.
Are you kidding? Without saving or without losing face, they want to do this gracefully. In other words,
They've already lost their face.
the easiest way for them to save face is for the landmark status to be approved.
And it gets them off the hook.
So Methodist is quite literally terrified from a group that they laughed at a month ago.
And today, the reason why they probably called you today at 3:45, and Frank and I were discussing this, they had the bombshell of Ron's letter. They had the bombshell Harold Anderson saying, "I think this can be discussed as it's being saved," and Charlton Heston put the wrath of God on him.
Charlton Heston is one of the most conservative people you can talk about.
And in Omaha, Nebraska, he is a god to those people.
Oh yeah.
They're rushing, they're flying. And so now it's a question of, I mean, we're scrambling now.
My dad is he's minded, so he's so interested in so many things. And
Apartment 17, and it's a.
I'm deep in thought.
Now, do you know where the Godfather's is?
And pissed. Yeah. No, that's deep in thought, pissed.
I think that we started this fight, so we got to finish it. You know, and that's where I feel. I feel we've got to just take it all the way. And honestly, I want to feel that down years from now, when people are saying, God, what a shame we lost the Indian Hills, just like they say, what a shame we lost the post office. You know, I want to be the guy that's like, you know, 62 years old saying, I fought for it. And I'm sure a lot of people think we're kind of goofy or stupid, and I don't care.
What just happened was the Zoning Board of Appeal refused, not only did they refuse to deal with the issue of blocking the permit that is apparently now in force to allow the destruction of the Gaiety Publix Theater, they refused to tell us why they were refusing to allow it to be discussed.
They put this on their docket, and when they saw that there was a crowd here in support, including city councilors and lawyers who could demonstrate that the ISD had acted flagrantly in violation of the law, they decided to shut the whole thing down, which is also illegal.
The reason they didn't want to hear it is because one can only take a decision to court. One can't take a non-decision to court. So if they were to deny the appeal, we could go to court. If they refused to hear the appeal, there'd be nothing to appeal. So after some yelling and screaming and civil disobedience, councilors Arroyo and Turner arranged for 40 or 50 of us to march to the 6th floor, to the office of the law department, where we were met with a locked door and a security guard. While we were standing there negotiating for 5 minutes, lo and behold, Marita Hopkins, the corporation counsel, wandered through the gathering. When she was asked by Shirley Kressel and the counselors why she had made this decision not to hear the case, she said she hadn't, that this was the first she had heard that the hearing had been denied.
And they say we're not going to hear it. And we are there to do that, and it's right now when they
An
decide.
hour afterwards, after the time was called, people were called in from all over. They sent notice of hearings to the appellants. They just said, for all of you here on that case, we're not having a hearing. We got instructions from the Corporation Council not to have a hearing. It's already been decided in court, which can't be true. You cannot decide a challenge to ISD until you exhaust your administrative avenues, which is ZBA.
She requested a half an hour to consult with Commissioner Shortsleeve, and the upshot was that they did hear it.
There were several testimonies from the members of the council and some for the community, clarifying that there is a very clear procedure in the laws that make the zoning board responsible for making a final decision.
I came today because Boston is a great city with a great heritage and a great future. And even though this project has been one of the low points in terms of planning in Boston, some of us still are hopeful that justice will prevail for the Gaiety Theater and for the people of Boston, and particularly the residents of Chinatown.
The Gaiety Theater is a very historic, place, and in the Midtown Cultural District plan, there always been a plan to use that space or a theater space, for the community, and by just completely demolishing that space and putting luxury development, high rises in its place, that's a disservice to the community. Not only do they not have housing, they no longer have that theater.
The same kinds of shenanigans that you saw at the Board of Appeal, people are seeing that every day. I don't know how it is in other cities, but I don't think we want to live like that.
What good does it do to have the laws on the book if no one can have standing to see them enforced. The zoning in the city of Boston protects theaters, whether or not they're landmarked. You can't demolish a theater in the Midtown Cultural District. It doesn't say you can't demolish a historic theater. It doesn't say you can't demolish a landmark theater. It doesn't say you can't demolish a theater that's in bad condition. It says you can't demolish a theater. Kensington's only defense against that requirement was to get people to believe that it wasn't a theater.
I think that it sends a really bad message to Chinatown. If you think of, say, a full set of teeth, and then the destruction of the gaiety, it's like the whole front of a mouth being taken out. I mean, it certainly does damage. It does serious damage. And I think it, I would hope, could be stopped.
If we successfully appeal their denial and have a success in court, we may still win. The theater may be gone at the point where the courts decide that the PDA was illegal and the development can't go forward. So this has been very frustrating.
Real estate is such big business now. I don't see that the theater will survive.
Nebraska Methodist Health System is not going to run a theater on this property. It's not our mission. It's not our goal statement. That's not what we're about. We should have parking spaces back there for 343 cars. That's what we should have. What's available there right now is 249 parking spaces.
It was mentioned that this property had a problem with parking. That the former Swanson Professional Building, which is now the MP-Plaza, had a problem with parking. And that this theater somehow dropped in the middle of this parking lot and took over the parking. The idea was that the businesses would use the parking in the daytime. The theater would use the parking in the evening and on weekends, Sunday afternoon. And it worked out pretty well.
Is there no way a compromise could be made? Could there not be a parking garage or something like that erected? And the use of the historic theater be restricted to times when parking would not impinge upon the hospital's use?
Parking garage, a flat surface parking is around $3,000 a stall. A parking garage multi-story, you start talking $13,000 a stall. So it becomes very expensive to go up with parking.
Getting back to our task, it's to determine whether or not Eden Hills deserves consideration by us for landmark status. Our decision isn't about whether or not we should aid or hinder Methodist Hospital in their mission to build the parking lot.
As far as from an architectural standpoint, Mr. Crowther has always been ahead of his time. He looked at Cinerama, and that's when he came up with the concept of completing the circle and just making a round theater. And in designing this, he started with the concept of the circle, but he went way beyond just having a circular theater. He had circular designs in the design elements. On the sides of the theater, he had these kind of architectural baffles that had the circles built into them. Carpeting had circles built into it. It was just a complete concept that was taken to its furthest extent. And over the years, this was the finest theater in Omaha, from the day it opened to the day it closed, in the region. And I think it's restorable. And that's all I've got.
I submit to you, Mr. Hunter, by his own statements, should have convinced you that this is not a historical landmark. The design of this building may have been of some significance back then. The building itself is not. The building itself is concrete, brick, and steel. There's no marble facades anywhere out. There's no frescoes anywhere. There is nothing of any significance around the interior of this building that you would see if you walk inside the other. Oh my goodness, there is just asbestos all over the walls. I see concrete walls rising from the floor to the ceiling. I see shattered steel beams going across the top covered again with asbestos. That's what you'd see. You wouldn't see an Orpheum-type fresco there. It's not there. It's a concrete steel building. That's what's there. They have the blueprints. It's going to be easier for them. It's going to be cheaper for them. It's going to be more economically reasonable for them to build a new building someplace else. And then they can have exactly what, in my mind, they desire. If they want an identical Indian Hills Theater, they can do that. If they want a better Indian Hills Theater, they can do that also. This property is going to be associated with Nebraska Methodist Health Systems. And if you're going to have clinics or physicians there, they're going to be open 24 hours a day. And that's why we want the parking. We want to fulfill our mission. We want to fulfill, again, our ideal of providing the maximum quality of health care at affordable prices for as many people as we can in this community. That's why we're going to use this property.
We're aware of the fact that we are undertaking this nomination in spite of the fact that the owner of the property is against it.
I personally and professionally believe that the theater has historical, cultural, architectural significance and is worthy of designation as a local landmark. Low condition, poor condition of a historic property does not mean it lacks integrity for nomination. It does have integrity.
What is the purpose of our commission making a landmark designation? Is it to stop the process and save the theater? I question whether that can be done.
There's no guarantee that the theater is going to be preserved just because it's designated a landmark, but I do think we have the responsibility to recognize the status of this property within our community, the status of this property within our community and our nation's history, and give it the recognition it deserves, regardless of what its future is. Designation does not guarantee preservation. Designation in and of itself reflects the importance of this property to us as a people.
Can we take a vote on this motion?
Do we need a second here?
Second. Second. Move to a vote.
Pedersen?
Yes.
Bixley?
Yes.
Kennedy? McGee?
Yes.
Kinkle?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Harding. Sorry. Yes.
The motion passes. I believe we're finished with our business for the day.
Is it true that the projector is still inside the theater of the main theater at this time?
Yes, it is.
Is that going to be removed in the same way that the other two projectors were by a bulldozer?
It was not removed by a bulldozer. It was removed by a crane, which is the only really feasible way to remove it because of the extreme weight associated with it. We did bring that in at our own expense. We are trying to preserve what elements we can so that they can be reused.
Why is it that more care wasn't taken in the removal of the 35 by 75 foot new screen? I personally saw the screen and I saw at least 6 tears and it was folded up, which I was told should never be done to a movie screen.
We're going to go outside here, okay?
No comment?
Go outside. I did.
Well, we got another one.
No comment about that?
Just a minute. Can we see your credentials?
Just independent filmmaker with public access.
Oh, you're an independent filmmaker. No, sorry, no comment. But we'll talk to these guys.
How you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. I feel great.
Feel great.
Unanimous.
I was scared to death. I was just going to flub everything up. I was horrified.
You were great. You were almost too nice.
I tried.
How do you respond to all the folks who are obviously very concerned about seeing what they consider a very precious thing to Omaha, as part of Omaha's culture?
You know, there's an emotional side to all these issues, and quite frankly, I'm not sure there's too many of us who haven't seen movies there at the Indian Hills. It was a fun place to see movies, but unfortunately, sometimes you have to say goodbye to things like that.
The Landmarks Commission was a bittersweet victory. They did vote completely in our favor. However, they were powerless. You know, they were 2 steps away from any real action. So I think it's another example of too little, too late.
I called down to the City Planning Board, which oversees the Landmarks Commission, and I found out that Methodist attorneys had written a letter to the city demanding that there be a rehearing of this issue, stating that it was not procedurally set up, that the proper notice wasn't given to Methodists, and demanding basically a revote. And I was shocked because, you know, as Methodist attorneys were writing these letters, the wrecking balls were just about to tear the theater down.
They wanted that vote withdrawn.
The landmark vote.
Right.
Why would they want it withdrawn when they were going to
Because
tear
it would
down the
make them
theater?
look bad. They got to do what they wanted, but they didn't want it on the record that, you know, they tore down a potential landmark.
The whole idea of the Landmarks Commission is to try to save landmarks. Well, if they don't have any power, then they're only really effective at not saving things, because that's the only time when their decisions have any meat.
Our government has not given them any teeth. In Europe, they have teeth. They have the power to arrest. They have the power to detain. They have the power to halt demolition and to prevent people from doing anything inappropriate to a theater. In Italy, France, England, there are national preservation trusts that have teeth. Until our government gives these groups teeth, they have nothing more to say other than in an advisory capacity.
It bothers me, yes, that landmark status by and large means nothing, except you can't use federal money to knock the building down. That's all that it generally means. I mean, there is no practical effect. But my training is as a lawyer, and I know how the world works, and private property is still private property. Municipalities still have the right to do particular things. And I don't think you're ever going to get landmark laws in this country that are much stronger than they currently are.
You know, here's something that we can really be proud of. It's got this big fancy title, but when it comes down to it, the government does nothing to protect these buildings. They just slap a label on it. That's about it.
The National Historic Trust, have they been a help?
They have written letters. And that's about it.
What is a landmark? Should it be something that contributes to the overall culture of a city? Then most every building in the United States that's over 100 years would contribute to the cultural vitality. I would say categorically that the Statue of Liberty, right there with Ellis Island, that's a national landmark. Can you say that the Golden Gate Bridge is a national landmark? I'd say it is. It's a symbol of our country.
What about Radio City?
Radio City Music, is it a landmark? I don't know, it's a theater, you see? So, you know, you throw the word landmark around. I think Hoover Dam is a landmark. I think the Mount Rushmore is a landmark. But now you're talking about cultural versus theatrical icons. A Main Street Theater, was it important for that town to come and see a movie? You tell me. I don't know if the movie theaters by themselves are landmarks.
Just because it's the first of black vaudeville, or because it's the first place where Gone with the Wind was shown, that's not going to save a building. The architecture is not going to save a theater building, because there were so many of them, not necessarily cookie cutters, but there were hundreds by Rapp and Rapp, and hundreds by Thomas Lamb, and hundreds by John Eberson. So what's unique about them? This atmospheric theater is the same basically as any other atmospheric theater. It's a room with some stars and clouds and imitation buildings on the walls. Now, it's unique because it's your theater in your town, but there were hundreds of those theaters across this country. So there is nothing about the architecture which is totally unique. The first one, sure, but that's gone. So it's neither the history nor the architecture that's going to save any theater building.
If it's the only one of its kind that remains and it's still structurally salvageable, something like the theater in the Round is very meaningful to preserve, because there are no more and there will be no more. So I think it's an individual call at that point. But it depends how much the community, from my point of view, utilized that theater. If that was really a gathering spot for the community and there is nothing of its kind left, and it's unique in addition in its architectural style, then it's something that deserves retention. People will argue with you, I'm sure, that you can take a photograph, but as you know, that's not the same thing as entering a facility.
I think what we need to remember, the idea of the sense of place that we have forgotten in this country, and I think you can get that sense of place in a movie theater, and that's why people remember them well, be it an Orpheum from the 1920s, which you might have seen in the 40s to see movies, or in the 50s or the 60s to see movies, or be it an Indian Hills Cinerama theater from the 60s. As long as you went there with other people and had a good time, you have a good feeling about that place, Most of the theaters we're talking about were on Main Street. So that place is connected with another place. And the idea of the sense of place of not just a specific building, but in a specific location, in a specific town, is very important. And a lot of people, I think, miss that, and they want that back.
It was excellent. It was very good.
I hate that.
And this is not a rap party, people.
I don't feel so bad.
This is not a rap. This is just because we don't know what the next week will bring. That's all.
Thank you. That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Thank you. We had a meeting tonight, and we noticed today that it looked like they were pulling out the final asbestos in these containers. And what we noticed when they cleared out all the buildings, all the vehicles were pulled away from the entrance, and for the first time the entrance is wide open. I'm shining my car light through it, and it's shooting all the way across the theater to the other side. It's entirely gutted. Our guess is they wouldn't leave this thing open unless they're planning to move quickly, so we wouldn't be surprised if they demolish this thing in the morning. We're guessing a wrecking ball in here just to pop it down, so we're going to keep an eye on it. We kind of half wonder if this is the first time they've ever left it open like this. We've been here half an hour and there's been no security guards, so we kind of half wonder if there's some security guards sitting inside on chairs waiting for somebody to come in and bust them so they can say that we are nutcases.
We refuse to come in. You can come on out and wave hi.
They probably at least have video cameras on us right now.
Yep. And it's funny, tomorrow's the 20th. And the 20th of June was the day they announced this, so a couple months, that's pretty quick.
I guess say goodbye to the theater.
Kind of like the long goodbye, guys. Wow. Really, I think we were sunk before we started because you have to have a willing seller. And it was clear from the Landmarks Commission that there's no way that Methodist was going to sell this property. Yeah. No way. So, the minute Methodist bought it, we were dead. And if it wasn't Methodist, it would have been HDR. And if it wasn't HDR, it would have been Commercial Federal Bank.
Well, just, your stance on what next, the need for parking, how if you could just tell me a little more about that, why this is going to be beneficial to Methodist, and just so we can have the other side of things.
It's even beautiful, and it's, it's a skeleton. Mm-hmm. Very nice.
get out of the driveway?
Oh, sure. Sorry.
Thank you. Get that thing out of my face.
Now listen, right there, man. You're doing the
Leave him alone!
Leave him alone. We're sick of this stuff.
Leave him alone!
You mess with him when we're here.
Leave him alone! I don't care about 911. You're not going to bother him.
I know you don't, but we're moving out of the way, man. Steve! You know, we've not said a word to those guys. You know, they're doing their job, I understand it. For him to get personal like that is total bullshit.
It's just sad. You know, I think they'll let us on. I don't know that for sure, but I really believe that. It's the end of an era.
Everything happened too late. The whole summer, everything happened too late.
Including the landmarks?
Everything. The landmarks was strictly a moral victory.
So what do you think, seeing this now?
I feel about as empty as that space.
Every time I go by there, I see 4 cars. It's almost like they're paying someone to park. Will you go park right there near where that theater was?
I see a missing piece of Omaha's history. To some degree, I see red.
I feel that it's another reason why Omaha has stopped caring about its past. How Omaha is this, you know, collection of strip malls and Wendy's and, you know, Taco Bells. It makes it yet another homogenous piece of crap in the Midwest.
When I drive by, and I drive by it all the time, I try not to look at it. Because, well, if I look at it, you know, I get a little angry. Because I realize that, you know, once it's gone forever. It was more than just an old movie theater. It was special.
There was a contingency in Omaha that wanted to keep that theater and open it back up.
To be able to live with myself, I had to get up off my ass and do something.
One of the guys said, you know what, I want you guys to understand, I've been through a fight like this before, and our chances of success are maybe 1%. And I remember thinking to myself, I'll take that.
Sometimes I get so angry. Sometimes I get so sad. When the world's crumbling all around me, you're the best I ever had. But if I ever fall to pieces, if I ever fall got trouble to my right. I know just what I